Our guest today made history by becoming the first woman to serve as Attorney General in the state of Illinois. She is a community leader, lawyer, and educator. After receiving her bachelor's degree from Georgetown University, our guest today moved to Africa at the height of the apartheid struggle, serving as a volunteer school teacher to young Zulu women, helping them overcome racism, violence, and oppression through education. Prior to being elected Attorney General, she served in the Illinois State Senate. Our guest today earned her law degree from Loyola University. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome back to the City Club of Chicago, the Attorney General of the state of Illinois, Lisa Madigan. Lisa?
Thank you. Well, let me start by telling Father that I will do my best to speak briefly. I accused him of having heard me speak before, knowing that is not my strong suit. For those of you who were here last year, I spent my time in front of you really trying to explain to you exactly what it is the Attorney General here in the state of Illinois does, because there is this great misperception that as the Attorney General, you are the state's chief law enforcement officer. And in fact, I am not that. I am the state's legal officer. So I'm really not the state's top cop, but the state's top lawyer. And I have, I believe, embraced that role in an attempt to really serve as the people's lawyer. And for those of you who weren't with us last year, for those of you who have forgotten what I told you that I did, we left you a cheat sheet on your table. So I'm not giving that speech again. But this will give you a sense, very briefly, of just the variety and the volume of issues that the office contends with. I don't believe that there are numbers on there in terms of our staff, but quickly, we are up to approximately, I think as of yesterday, it was 675 employees. Out of that number, 302 of those people are lawyers. We have a budget of approximately $64 million, not nearly as large as Director Ruman's budget, but he's been very helpful to our cause in other ways. And that's really all you need to know about the office. If there's anything else you want to know, read it on the card or ask me during question time. And the reason I say that is that every single one of you who came up to me before the lunch started, you've only had one question. And that is, so what was it like to argue in front of the U.S. Supreme Court? Were your knees shaking? That was Bernie Judge's question. What did you do to prepare was another question that I got. So let me just start at the beginning and give you a sense of what the case was about, what I did in terms of preparation, and then what it is like to argue in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, should any of you have an opportunity or be thinking of doing that. Really, you should. It's fabulous. First of all, this is a Fourth Amendment case, and it emanated out of a situation where an Illinois state trooper pulled over an individual for speeding on I-80. He was going 71 in a 65 zone. Beware. See, this could happen to you. For those of you who laughed, you speed. Those of you who didn't get it, maybe you're just a little worried about that. In the process of dealing with the traffic stop, another trooper showed up. And this trooper was part of the Illinois State Police Canine Unit. In other words, he has been trained and works with a dog. The dog is a drug detection dog. So while the first officer was writing up a warning ticket, the second officer walks a dog around this individual's car. The dog alerts to the presence of drugs in the trunk and tells the first officer this. So the first officer goes, opens up this individual's trunk, and they find almost 300 pounds of marijuana. not an amount for recreational use. I'm hoping. The trial court, after a series of other issues, ended up convicting this individual of a Class X felony. And for those of you who are prosecutors, and for those of you who are not, you should realize that Class X is not a good felony category. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison and assessed a street value fine of $256,136. So all was well at the trial court level as far as the state was concerned. All was even well at the appellate court level because they affirmed Mr. Caballes' conviction. But the Illinois Supreme Court, in essence, ended up ruling that a sniff by a drug detection dog at a traffic stop amounts to a search. And therefore, in order to conduct a sniff, there really needed to be some sort of individualized suspicion. And this is where I'm going to start to get a little legal, but it'll only last for seconds. In other words, there needs to be, and this is what the court said, reasonable suspicion. For those of you who are lawyers, you know that's a little less than probable cause, but it's still more than what we would consider a Fourth Amendment non-event needs whatsoever. So, we decided that we wanted to actually appeal that decision, and once you get to the Illinois Supreme Court, the only place left to do that is in front of the United States Supreme Court. So we petitioned for cert. Obviously, cert was granted, and we then had to figure out, okay, how are we going to argue this case? What do we need to do? Well, in terms of my preparation, I got to have a great deal of fun in addition to doing a great deal of work. So I have spent many days at this point with the Illinois State Police at their training facility outside of Springfield, where they actually train dogs. And I know a lot of you are thinking, dogs, those dogs are big, those dogs are scary, you're small, you're pregnant, what are you thinking? But as it turns out, the majority of dogs that they use at this point are Labrador Retrievers. They use German Shepherds and Dutch Shepherds. They do have some Belgian Malinois, which are a little crazier than the first two types of dogs that I mentioned. But overall, these dogs are very, very well trained, not just in terms of their drug detection abilities, but certainly in terms of their obedience. They have very close relationships with their handlers. They go home with their handlers every night, so they become part of these individuals' families. And in addition to doing work as drug detection dogs, they are also used frequently to track people who might wander away from a nursing home or a child who may be lost. So there's a wide variety of ways that these dogs are used by law enforcement. For those of you who are back to being concerned that you're speeding and the dog's going to walk around your car when you get stopped, let me give you some statistics. The state police effect approximately 35,000 traffic stops a month. And out of those 35,000 traffic stops, a dog walks around a car approximately 125 times. So your percentages of avoiding that are very, very high. And but let me tell you something else that's fascinating. From 1999 to 2003, the Illinois State Police Canine Unit was able to actually seize over 42 tons of marijuana, 1.2 tons of cocaine, all of that having an estimated street value of approximately $415 million. So these drug detection dogs are incredibly helpful to law enforcement in intercepting illegal drugs that are being driven through the state of Illinois. Now, obviously one of the reasons for that is that dogs have incredible noses, far better than most of us have, unless you've been pregnant. I have suggested during the time we actually were doing these moot courts that maybe, they'd like to find pregnant women and deploy them. If for some reason there was a concern about dogs versus people doing the sniffing. Luckily, that part's over in my pregnancy. The other thing that's very important is that a lot of the vehicles being used, whether it's a car or a van or a truck, these criminals are modifying them in a way that they've really created hidden traps or secret compartments in them to transport drugs. And so even if an individual is able to, think that there's something the matter, it may be very difficult, if not impossible, for an officer to find the drugs that are in that car. And so there are a lot of things that dogs can do that humans are just not as good at. And so really they've become an integral part, not just of law enforcement here in Illinois, but across the country. And so here in Illinois, I think they've had a canine unit section for approximately 30 years, but dogs have been used for thousands of years. I think about the first time that any jurisdiction in the United States was using dogs, early 1900s, and it would have been in New York City. They purchased some dogs. Now let's get back to the dogs being frightening and big. Anybody here still ride the L? Okay, good. So have you ever been on the L and they brought those big, black, scary muzzled dogs on? I'll confess to being scared of those dogs. Those dogs look nothing like the types of dogs that the state police are using. And in fact, I learned by actually asking one of the dog handlers that works on the CTAL, what do you use the dogs for? And they're all dressed in their black fatigues, making them look even more intimidating when they're with the dog. They use them for criminal apprehension purposes. So if you do happen to be on the L and you see one of those dogs, they're not sniffing out drugs, they're actually there to attack somebody. Not you. So sometimes I do kind of get to serve as the chief law enforcement officer by warning you that that's what those dogs are for. So don't commit crime on the CTA. In addition to working with the state police and learning about how they train dogs and how they walk dogs around cars, I also, as you can imagine, spent an inordinate amount of time reading cases. It is very similar, for those of you who have gone to law school, to being back in your first year of law school when you briefed every single case you read. Because ultimately, when you're in front of the Supreme Court, even though it's for a very limited period of time, you obviously have no idea what question they may ask. And they may ask you a question about, well, what was the basis of our holding in this case? Or they may ask you about the factual background of the case. They may throw at you hypothetical questions. And so we went through a whole series of moot courts in preparation, because obviously you'd rather hear the question before you're in front of the Supreme Court for the first time, so you can think of an answer. And I can tell you, I'm somebody that you really would like to have in your car when you get pulled over, because I know exactly what your rights are and what they aren't. Let me address, how many in this room have actually gone and watched an argument in front of the U.S. Supreme Court? Gary, put your hand up. Gary's my Solicitor General, who went through all of this with me and argued a year ago. Okay, if you've been there, you know this. If you haven't been, I think everybody has this sense, and to some extent it's true, that the United States Supreme Court is this very solemn and serious body. And true, you are standing in front of, this past week, 8 probably of the brightest constitutional law scholars, obviously, in the country. And because of that, it's certainly a challenging group of people to argue in front of. But what a lot of people don't recognize or know is that most of the time during Supreme Court arguments, there is a lot of, and I just term it witty banter, that goes on among the judges. If you're really, really fortunate, a little bit between you and the bench, although normally they're making jokes at your expense. So we went out to D.C. a number of days early, and last Monday, we went and listened to the 2 arguments that took place in front of the court. And I will tell you, the court is a very different place right now, because the Chief Justice is obviously out getting treatment for thyroid cancer. And so it was much more solemn, sad. I don't think any of the justices as much as cracked a smile on Monday. And so, I kind of like a little bit of engagement when I'm speaking, and so was a little bit fearful that that was going to be the tone of the court on Wednesday. Luckily, it was a little more vibrant, and so I'll tell you a few of the lighter moments. At some point, Justice Stevens looked up and said, "Now, this guy was traveling on I-80, correct?" And I said, "Yes, he was on I-80. And he was pulled over for going 71 into 65? I'm like, he said, "You know, I've traveled on I-80. To which Justice Scalia, who sits right next to him, kind of, chimed in and said, "Well, inadvertently." I responded, much to Gary's chagrin, because you're not supposed to tell jokes or try to engage in witty banter, and you're actually told this. I mean, it says it in the guide to arguing in front of the Supreme Court. But So I said back to Justice Stevens, "Justice Stevens, we are always happy to have you in the state of Illinois." And luckily, to Gary's relief and mine, I did get a few smiles from the bench, and that was my only vague attempt at humor. We moved right along from there. Now, I don't know, normally there's a table full of press people somewhere, and for anybody who's here with the media, I really am indebted to you, because being prepared to speak in front of the U.S. Supreme Court is in large part because of all the really nasty press conferences I have endured over the past years. And, not that I'm likening people in the media to Supreme Court justices, but it certainly was a help to have gone through that situation where you have no idea what someone's going to ask you, but you really need to respond and hopefully sound intelligent at the same time. So anyway, let me wrap up by saying, although this was a wonderful, thrilling, albeit nerve-wracking experience, you never really know what's going to happen, and you certainly don't get a sense from the argument. A number of you have asked, when will you find out? We can find out any time up until June. So we'd like to hear earlier rather than later, but there's a good chance that it'll be sometime in between 2 to 3 months from now in June. And then there'll be more news articles. Let me talk to you about the most covered issue that our office has dealt with this year. Holly, it's all about you. The Dave Matthews Band bus dumping. One of the days I don't know if it was the day that occurred or the day that we filed a lawsuit against the Dave Matthews Band, Melissa Murs, who I know is in the room somewhere, I think, came into my office and said, "You have to Google this." It was 3,000 articles. We were on MTV, we were, all over Australia, and it was international news. And unfortunately, obviously, for the people who were involved, just the most horrific and disgusting thing that could ever possibly happen to you. And Holly and the company really deserve to be commended, because they have done so much to help those people. And obviously, this was not the type of notoriety that they wanted in terms of, getting more people to take those tours. But but I've been on many of them. They're wonderful. Nothing ever happened. And we're at a point now, for those of you who don't know this, we ended up filing a number of we filed one complaint, and it's a series of environmental violations that are alleged in that complaint. And so we are still working on that matter. You've probably seen or read that the Dave Matthews Band did give, I think, about $100,000. I think part of it went to the city and part of it went to Friends of the Chicago River, which I presume they'll be doing some remediation, although they haven't admitted any guilt. So that continues. And I'm hoping, really, that never again will something that horrific happen to a group of people when I'm the Attorney General. An issue that last year when I was here, I thought was going to be done and over with in a series of months, that I have now resigned myself to realizing it's never going away, the 10th license, the casino license. It's jinxed. And so any of you sitting out there who are thinking you want a piece of it, I'm advising you against that. We'll see what happens with the legislative session, but as you know, otherwise there are a series of litigation fronts that we're dealing with that on, and really I see no end in sight. An issue that you may have thought went away years ago but hasn't and is still with us is tobacco enforcement. So back in 1998, the Master Settlement Agreement that ended the national tobacco litigation was signed and put into place. However, we still are dealing with tobacco companies that are seeking to evade what that settlement said they could not do. And in particular, we took a very aggressive stand against a campaign called Cool Mix. This was Brown and Williamson's continued attempt to lure, in particular, African American youth to start smoking. And they're doing it by actually packaging their cigarettes and marketing their cigarettes in African American communities. They've got a hip-hop theme to them. They can, if you purchase all of the different packages, you can fit them together in a sort of a mural, and it's kind of a graffiti-esque mural. They had a website that was up that once you were on there, you could actually practice your graffiti skills on, and while they kept on telling us we're not trying to market to kids, there was also a part of their website that said something about, it talked about, be cool while you're in school. It's like, how are you guys telling us you're not marketing to kids when you're talking about, people in school? And we ended up settling that case. We'd filed a case here in Illinois, New York had filed, Maryland filed. We settled that case for about $1.5 million and are making sure that the money is going to organizations that are working to prevent youth from starting to smoke, because the statistics are just horrific. People who start to smoke before the age of 18, it's about 90% of them stay addicted to smoking throughout their lifetimes. And so it's really just a matter of time until the healthcare industry is going to have to contend with that. And so we want it not to happen in the first place. An issue that I guess I had always hoped really wouldn't ever be an issue, but that we do some tremendous, although really unknown work on, disability rights. Believe it or not, here in the state of Illinois, your Attorney General's office has the largest disability rights bureau in the country. And the one issue that you may have heard of that took place earlier this year in the springtime, there was a girl, Brittany Booth, who had taken all of the coursework necessary to graduate from Lyons Township High School, and yet the administration did not want her to go through the ceremony for a slightly technical reason. There had been a number of articles, I think there were some editorials, at least that I recall seeing in the Tribune, and somebody reached out to us, and so we contacted the administration and said, reasonable accommodation. There's only one opportunity that this girl is going to have to graduate with her friends, with the people that she's gone to school with. And so they relented. I'm very happy to say she was able to graduate with her friends. She and her family are just wonderful people. She's starting a job, actually, which has already started at this point. But for those of you who are concerned or do work with people or children with disabilities, I really want you to know that I've got a bureau that does some fascinating work, and oftentimes it is as simple as us writing a mean letter to get that accomplished. And so please take advantage of that opportunity. An issue that we have made terrific progress on since last year, sex offenders. I think when I spoke last year, I probably kind of gave you a bit of a recap of some of the hearings that we had conducted throughout the state last October. And in response to those hearings, we were really moving on a path, and we still are, but we were moving on a path to put in place so-called lifetime supervision for sex offenders. But we kept on hearing stories of terrible failures of our state sex offender registry. And so at the end of one of the hearings, I walked out and looked at my policy director and said, we're fixing the sex offender registry. And so we ended up putting together something that we call, for short, ISORT. It stands for the Illinois Sex Offender Registry Team. And what we did starting in November is just make some basic changes to the registry so that people can get information such as what crime did this individual commit to land them on the registry? Is this person compliant or non-compliant? In other words, do we really know where they are or do we not know where they are? It also tells you whether or not an individual is a sexual predator. And so there's information as well. We've put it up in Spanish so that people for whom English is not their first language can understand what is being provided for them and can better protect themselves and their children. We've also done a whole series of public awareness issues. And so we have distributed, I believe, over 12,000 posters that alert people to, here is the sex offender registry address, here is a hotline number you can call if you have any questions or concerns. And it's amazing the response that we've seen. From October of last year, there were a little over 59,000 hits that month to the registry. Last month, this October, over 100,000 hits to the registry. So we know people are using it. I know it's not just my staff that's using it, because I thought about that for a while. Maybe that's what's happening. But it's in addition, what we've done, which I think is the very exciting piece, is that we've created what we call our Fugitive Squad. And so we've gotten the cooperation of the state police, the Department of Corrections, the U.S. Marshals. In fact, they're all sitting in my office right now at a meeting that I'm not at, as well as state's attorneys, chiefs of police from across the state, our office. And we are systematically going through and identifying non-compliant sex offenders, and we are tracking them down. We've also had tremendous help from the media. So the Bloomington Panagraph ran an article, I'm going to say a month and a half, maybe 2 months ago at this point, and they had the pictures of the non-compliant sex offenders in their area. There were 11 of them. And out of those 11, by the paper running that article, we were able to find 6 of them. The Belleville News-Democrat, which is in the Metro East area, they did a similar article, 57 pictures they ran, and I think they just did Madison and St. Clair counties. We were able to locate 19 of them. We have actually done raids in Chicago, Rockford, Lake County's done one, Springfield's done one, and so we have reduced our non-compliance rate from it had been about 17, 18%. We're now down to less than 10% in Illinois. And while you may think that that sounds like a very high number, the national non-compliance rate for sex offenders registering is 24 to 25% in each state. Because of the work that we've been able to do and the success that we've had, I am now co-chair of the Sexually Violent Predators Committee of the National Association of Attorneys General, which, for those of you who don't know, goes by the lovely acronym of NAG. I'm all ready to be a mom. So, that's really, I would say, one of the most exciting things we've been able to do, in part because almost every state maintains a registry, but in order for those registries to work at all, the information on them has to be accurate, and there needs to be a system in place for us to ensure that it is. And so by creating iSort, we've really been able to significantly improve that information, find these individuals, and the real goal is to protect women and children from having to undergo an enormously horrific and devastating crime. With that, as I told you, I could talk all day, but instead I should be quiet, and we should take some questions. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your laughter.
We just wanted to take a moment to recognize Alderman Danny Solis. Alderman Solis. I saw some people, Lisa, figuring out the math, and you have a better chance of winning the lottery than having one of those dogs stop you. So don't be afraid. Okay.
There you go.
Time for questions. We've got time for a couple questions of the Attorney General.
Or you can leave.
And you can turn your cell phones on shortly. There's a microphone right there if someone would like to ask a question. Jeff, question, not a statement.
Jeff.
Okay, Jeff?
Question.
Okay.
No, no promo for the show. Attorney General Madigan, this is, well, the only statement.
I know who you are.
I'm going to do what I can to sharpen up your skills for your next Supreme Court argument.
All right. Good luck.
As most of the people in this room know, and I'm sure you well remember, you spent a fair amount of time taking actions as the chief legal officer of the state of Illinois that affected the ability of Rosemont to have a casino. And I'm wondering, as the chief legal officer of the state of Illinois, whether there also might be some statutory responsibilities for your office to take a look at whether the city of Chicago should, or other municipalities should be able to own a casino, since that has not been the case, and as you know, Mayor Daley has asked to do that. So could you give us your views as to whether the office ought to be weighing in on that? And secondly, is that something, if the office looks at, that you should step aside on? Second question.
No third. No
I
third,
thought it was like
Jeff.
third or
No
fourth,
third.
Jeff.
No, just is there any conflict there that would cause you to step aside because of the well-known relationship between the Daleys and the Madigans and Mayor Daley's support of you in the primary and the general?
Jeff, here's where we are right now in terms of the city of Chicago owning a casino. The legislature, in terms of the bill that they may or may not pass this week or sometime in the future, would have to change the law to allow that. And I haven't seen any language floating around. I haven't been in Springfield, so I don't know if there is a draft out there and what it looks like. But no, there's no conflict because I'm not actually, I'm not in the legislature, and I would not be voting on that bill. The reason that the Office of the Attorney General is involved in the 10th casino license is because that became a litigation matter. And once it's a litigation matter, as the legal officer for the state, our office is involved. And so that's why we've ended up in this situation whatsoever. Otherwise, normally, it's the Illinois Gaming Board who has the authority to deal with problems in terms of casinos in Illinois.
But do you have an opinion as to the desirability of that?
Yeah, no. Jeff, how about letting Mike? Thank you, Jeff. Mr. Radzilowski, would you please tell us who you are?
My name is Mike Radzilowski. I'm an attorney. I'm a member of the City Club. My question concerns, your office has been fairly activist, and I think you've read about what's happening in New York with Spritzer going after the insurance industry. Mm-hmm. Does your office have any offensives either against the insurance industry or people I think who richly deserve it would be HMOs and the healthcare field?
Oh, thank you, Mike. This is worse than the Supreme Court.
No, it's not worse. Trust me. We are well aware of what my colleague Elliott is doing in New York. It is an issue that I think all AGs across the country are looking at. In terms of other litigation opportunities, we are always looking at different avenues. But again, look at what we currently do. When we have an opportunity to work with people who, bring us matters that are obviously illegal and problematic for people, we investigate those. If there's a cause of action, we bring those. Sometimes, though, it is a resource issue. And, as our primary responsibility to represent the state, and we currently have over 25,000 open cases against the state, we spend the bulk of our time contending with that.
I'm going back to the genesis.
Could you just identify yourself, sir?
Ed Cooper, sorry, City Club number. Going back to the genesis of your Supreme Court case, is a modified, this may be an ignorant question, but is a modified car obvious from the outside, or why would a canine unit show up at a traffic stop?
That's a very good question, in fact. A canine unit would show up if the officer who pulls somebody over has a belief that there's something strange going on. In other words, they have a belief, usually because there's some indicators that the police are trained in to determine that somebody might be smuggling drugs. That and they may show up if they're nearby. So typically, if you're out on the highway as a state trooper and you effect a traffic stop, if there's somebody in the vicinity, another trooper, they show up as backup. But only when there's, there's a thought that there could be drugs in the car as the dog actually walked around.
Did the first officer call backup or no?
No, the second officer showed up because he heard it over the dispatch.
Our final question.
I was Joel Cohen, unindicted CEO of Richard Hoffman Corporation, City Club member.
That's on tape.
You haven't checked your answering machine yet, Joel.
I lost track of when you do, because I know Jay will be real interested to have a playmate for his child.
Is that your question?
That's your question?
My question is, I might be incorrect about this, but you're possibly the first Attorney General to give birth.
You are incorrect.
I am incorrect?
The New Hampshire, go ahead, try to ask a question.
While in office, and I was just wondering if that might cast you onto the national scene possibly earlier or sooner than that you desire.
It's a city club. What can you expect?
Yeah. The current New Hampshire Attorney General is also a woman. About 2 months ago, she had a child. So again, no first for me. And I'm very happy here in the state of Illinois, and I hope to remain here in the state of Illinois for a very long time.